What up, Marsh Pod? Happy early holidays. I think it's time we can say that, right? Got a good pod today. I think it's a good pod. Went back and rewatched some of the Charleston Invitational, and wanted to kind of go top down because this is kind of a twofold thing. Wanted to take a look at some of our unsigned recruits and try to get an idea of maybe what's happening on the court, but at the same time asking some questions about what's happening off the court. I know that we've had the recruitment change, the timeline change that certainly impacted, the restrictions and the deadline to sign is certainly different. But also kind of wanted to just look at and wonder about why some of these guys aren't signed, but looking at the on-court production and see if there's any indicators there. So I went back, rewatched the Charleston Invitational, and I took a look at Keithen Carter. So Keithen Carter, he is the number one unsigned recruit according to ACA, the recruit rankings. And there's some big names up there, but he's just right now at the top. And I know that earlier this week there were a couple of question marks coming in from our teams in the field, our players, wondering, questioning, curious about how some of the recruiting rankings. Now, I'm not behind the rankings, but I figured this is a good question. What's going on where a guy is highly ranked but maybe not receiving the type of respect, or he's not quite producing on the court that's in line with his production, for better or worse. So I went back and I watched specifically. This isn't going to be a 20-minute deep dive on, or a high-level dive on every single player. I went back and I just wanted to watch Keithen Carter. Now, unfortunately, there was only one game that Keithen Carter and Death Row played, which they lost to Corey Yams, who did you come out and say this? Corey Yams was the best player on the court against Keithen Carter in that opening round victory over Death Row. But Keithen Carter, he's the number one guy in the mark. He's 6'4", wing guard, and I thought he played well, but the biggest takeaway that I had was he wasn't the best player on the court. He might have been the best player on his team. I thought Tyrell Thompson played really good, but Keithen Carter wasn't the best player on the court in that opening round game for Death Row. Corey Yams was, I thought, without question, the best player in that game, and I thought Corey Yams had a really good overall tournament. But specific to Keithen Carter, he started off really good. Hit a quick trigger three in the left corner, looked confident, contested. I think that being able to hit contested shots was pretty consistent throughout the game. He hit a number of mid-range jumpers that were contested, but where he didn't strive was in the paint and getting to it. So offensively, he didn't really take advantage until the game was 9-5. His second bucket after that quick trigger three, which I guess technically is a 2, was a step back over Corey Yams. That made the game 9-5. They end up losing, and I'll say a lot of that is because they just stopped Death Row, stopped moving the ball. They became very one-pass basketball. There was very little off-ball activity. It was a lot of iso ball, and I don't think that's where Keithen Carter really showed an ability to be productive off the dribble. He wasn't aggressive early on in the game. He didn't really kind of impact the game right away. And then when he did eventually drive, he missed a number of contested layups. Again, one game, you're off for one game. This is super small sample size theater. I mean, this is tiny. One game to 15, but just that consistently missing the contested layups was something that I thought was a little concerning. Like I said, late in the game, he started to hit some contested jumpers. That was, in line with what he did right off the bat. But just that concern with me was he didn't really try to go off the dribble much at all. He did have a nice vision to see a cutting Tyrell Thompson for an open layup, but 3-on-3 basketball is tough to really show a lot of off-court or on-ball vision because there's just not a lot of movement. You don't have 4 other players or really 8 other players moving in that creating space, and the ability to really put together a an offensive play. So I don't think that you can take too much away from him there from like a playmaking standpoint, but I did like the vision to see Thompson deliver a nice strike. Thompson finished inside. That was early in the game. But on the defensive end, it was kind of interesting because I thought that um, Keithen Carter did a really good job of staying in front of who he was guarding. For the most part, is Demario Duval II. But he took on some contests against Corey Yams. But the strange part was that they finished over him a lot, and that again was it a good game from Duval, who didn't play great in the championship game. He does have the size disadvantage against Corey Yams, but Keithen Carter's 6'4", and for the guys, for Duval and Yams to finish so consistently through him and through good contests, it's tough to say, is that more of a case of those two being great finishers in those situations, or was that just Keithen Carter not impacting the shot as much as it would have appeared he could have? One game, I might lean on Duval and Yams. Again, I said Yams was the best player on the court. It's kind of like saying, oh, LeBron James finished over you. Yeah, he's going to do that against everybody. But it's something to keep an eye on. He didn't get beat. I think that's the biggest thing. Keithen Carter did not get beat off the dribble. He had good contests, but they just continued to finish over top of him. But again, as I said at the jump, overall, I didn't think Keithen Carter was the best player on the court. And I think that's not an unfair thing to say to somebody. I thought Corey Yams was, and I think the ACA rankings just need updating, frankly. Because Keithen Carter's good, but he didn't blow me away the way Corey Yams did. And I'm not going to go into a Corey Yams because I didn't spend the time to watch him specifically. We'll get to a lot of these unsigned guys and these top players to go through them one by one. But Corey Yams was the guy that you just kind of be like, wow, that's another good play. Wow, that's another good play. Keithen Carter didn't have a ton of those. So, like I said earlier too, moving to kind of looking at some of these top guys, the question I saw for the top of the day was why is Jason Tata still unsigned? And I think that question can be extended to Trey Hyman. That question can be extended to Xavier Pope. That question can be extended to Dime Hardaway and Corey Yams. And I think it's twofold. I think it's on one side of the bar, you've got these changes to the recruiting landscape where it was the Wild West early on when we first dropped, when the league first opened up recruiting, and it's kind of, I think, smartly taken a backseat to say let's really make sure that we're doing this correctly. We don't want to be doing something anything foolish in how this is organically done. But I think that's leaving a lot of these big names out there. What I'm most surprised about is that we haven't heard any leaks about where a guy might be leaning, who's talking to Jason Tata, who's talking to Xavier Pope. We're not seeing a ton of that recruiting by coaches or players in the public eye. Now, there's plenty of things going on behind the scenes, I am sure of, but these types of things have a way of finding their way into the public sphere, whether that's through the player saying something, whether that's through reporting. We haven't seen a ton of that, and I'm curious if that means that there's nothing to be reported on with these big names, which to me would indicate that's a negative for the coaches, that we're not at least hearing something about these guys, right? There's no public pitch by, I'll use the example that I was asked earlier. Javad Storm, should he go after De'Aaron Cruz? And I don't think that's a great fit because of all the guards he has on his roster, but we're not seeing any public proclamations from, let's say, Gil Blumenstein, who just had a great tournament alongside De'Aaron Cruz. We're not seeing him come out and say, yo, Cruz, come to Indy, run with Malachi Booth. This is a good backcourt that we could put together. There isn't that. And I'm curious if that means that it means one of two things. It means there's nothing happening and there's nothing to report on, or it is very well kept under the rug. And I think that it'll be interesting if and when it comes out, when we kind of figure out, was it just a lack of coaches making the necessary efforts to get players? Was it a lack of them wanting to allow those conversations into the public sphere? And I think either have their pitfalls. If you're a coach and you're not making the steps, De'Aaron Cruz is incredibly quick. Xavier Pope was dominant. Corey Yams continues to put up impressive performances. And we don't have any idea where they're going. Like, why, if you're a coach, yeah, sure, you can't get the player to commit to later in the season, but you're not even pushing to try to get him to feel like he should join your team. To me, I think that's a little concerning. But hopefully we'll get more information on that. That's it for me. Everyone have a great weekend. We'll be back on Tuesday.